What is peace?
Well, peace can be understood in a simple way or a deeper, a little bit more complicated way. So, the simple way we already know peace is a state of relations between conflict groups where they're not fighting. And of course, there's lots of evidence where sometimes peace breaks out. So, for example, in the past 40 years, there have been 240 peace agreements that have been reached, and about half of them last for 5 years. Okay, so that's not perfect, but better than violence. But I think the deeper, more interesting answer is peace is a process. It's not just a fixed state about how groups are not violent. It's a process in which these militant groups are engaged with each other to prevent the outbreak of violence. And this process goes from the past, a reflection on the past, to the present, and even a vision of the future. So, just very briefly, the past, in many cases, conflict groups harbor very deeply, emotionally, deeply felt resentments from their sense of oppression, and in some cases, collective trauma. And how do you deal with that? Well, one way is through Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. The South Africa Truth and Reconciliation Commission is a model from which over 30 others were formed. So peace is a process about the present also, that many conflict groups are hold really intense grievances against their perceived enemy, where their enemy, is cast as threatening to the existence of their groups. This is so obvious in the case of Israel and Palestine. And as I'm talking about this, there's a small-scale war broken out in Israel and against the people, the Palestinians in Gaza. So what do we do with that? Well, it's the process of facilitated dialogue. And there have been hundreds of facilitated dialogue in Israel-Palestine. They don't always lead to positive results always, but in many cases, they do forestall the outbreak of violence. And peace is also about the future, to establish systems of communication that are in place before a particular catalytic act of violence breaks out. Systems of communication among officials, among non-official peace builders, even cultural exchanges involve systems of constructive communication. And this is critical to the idea of peace breaking out in the long term, obviously. So to summarize, we can look at peace in a simple way, or I think more deeply as a process by which the conflict groups interact with each other. So these are just a few examples of the way in which groups can promote peace, and we'll talk about more of these processes in our next episode.